There was a time when Westeros had no Iron Throne. There was no King's Landing. There was no single king sitting above the kingdoms. Instead, was divided between rival rulers, ancient families, and competing crowns. The north belonged to the Starks. The Vale belonged to the Aryns. The Riverlands were ruled by House Hoare. The Westerlands belonged to the Lannisters. The Reach was controlled by House Gardener. The Stormlands were ruled by the Durandons. And far to the south, Dorne remained fiercely independent. But none of them expected the greatest change in the history of Westeros to come from across the narrow sea, from a small island called Dragonstone.
At the center of this story was a young Valyrian lord named Aegon Targaryen. He was the man who finally united most of the continent under one crown.
He would become known as Aegon the Conqueror, the first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm. To understand Aegon, we first have to understand where House Targaryen came from. Long before the Targaryens ruled Westeros,
its power came from dragons. The Valyrians houted dragons. They conquered enormous territories. They built cities. They controlled trade.
They created an empire that stretched across much of Essos. For centuries, almost no one could challenge them. But House Targaryen was never the most powerful family in Valyria. They were one Dragonlord family among many. And then came the doom. Fire erupted. The land itself seemed to break apart. But the Targaryens survived. Years before the doom, Rhaenys Targaryen oversaw its destruction. Her father, Aenar, believed her warning. They abandoned Valyria for Dragonstone. While Valyria disappeared, the Targaryens remained on Dragonstone. They possessed dragons, they possessed Valyrian blood, and they watched Westeros from across the narrow sea. Aegon Targaryen was born in 27 BC. His father was Aerion Targaryen. His mother was Valena Velaryon.
Through his mother, Aegon was also connected to House Velaryon, another ancient family that had settled in Westeros before the Doom.
Aegon grew up on Dragonstone. He was surrounded by the remnants of Valyria. He was raised in a family where dragons were not myths. They were companions, and they were symbols of authority. But Aegon was different from many of the rulers he would eventually face. He understood that Westeros was divided. The continent contained enormous kingdoms, but none of them possessed enough power to dominate all the others. And while they fought one another, Aegon watched. Eventually, Aegon began planning something that seemed almost impossible. He would conquer Westeros. Two people would stand beside him, his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys.
Visenya was Aegon's elder sister. She was a warrior, serious, disciplined, and formidable. She rode Vhagar. Visenya was not simply Aegon's political partner. She was a military commander, and she understood that the conquest would require more than simply showing up with dragons.
Then there was Rhaenys. Rhaenys was Aegon's younger sister. Where Visenya was associated with war and discipline, Rhaenys was known for her more adventurous and romantic nature.
She rode Meraxes, and she too became one of the central figures in the conquest. Aegon married both sisters. This was not unusual for the Targaryens.
The family had preserved the tradition of marrying within the bloodline. The three siblings therefore became not only a family but a political unit. Aegon was the king. Visenya and Rhaenys became his queens. And each had a dragon. Aegon had Balerion, Visenya had Vhagar, Rhaenys had Meraxes. When Aegon began his conquest, Westeros was not peaceful. The continent was divided into 7 major political kingdoms. In the north ruled House Stark. The Starks had ruled from Winterfell for thousands of years. The north was enormous.
Farther east was the Vale. The Vale was controlled by House Arryn. Its greatest fortress, the Eyrie, was considered almost impossible to assault.
In the Riverlands, House Hoare ruled. Harren Hoare, known as Harren the Black, controlled both the Iron Islands and much of the Riverlands. To the west stood the Westerlands. House Lannister controlled this wealthy region. Its gold mines made the Lannisters extraordinarily powerful. South of the Westerlands was the Reach. The Reach was ruled by House Gardener. The Gardeners had one of the oldest royal bloodlines in Westeros. The Stormlands were ruled by House Targaryen, and finally, there was Dorne. Dorne was different from the other kingdoms. Its people had a strong culture of independence. Its deserts and mountains made invasion difficult. And unlike the other kingdoms, Dorne would never fully submit to Aegon. But Aegon did not initially have to defeat all 7 kingdoms. He only needed to make them understand one thing, that resistance against dragons was possible, but extremely dangerous. He landed on the shores of BC. At first, his force surprisingly small. He did not arrive with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, but numbers were no longer the most important factor in warfare. Because Aegon had Balerion. Balerion the Black Dread was enormous. His wings could darken the sky. Balerion's flames could destroy fortifications, and his size alone was enough to terrify armies. Aegon's forces established a settlement known as the Aegon Fort. It was the beginning of what would eventually become King's Landing. From this location, Aegon began his campaign. His first objective was not simply to destroy.
It was to make the kingdoms surrender, but some rulers refused. One of them was Harren the Black, and Harren believed he had built the perfect fortress, Harrenhal.
Was one of the greatest castles ever built in Westeros. Its towers were enormous. Its walls were thick. It was designed to withstand armies. Harren believed that if he could retreat behind those walls, Aegon would have no way to defeat him.
Aegon gave Harren an opportunity to surrender.
Harren refused. He trusted his castle. An army could spend months or even years trying to take such a fortress. But Aegon was not fighting a conventional war. He had Balerion. Aegon flew directly over Harrenhal. Harrenhal became a monument to the destructive power of dragons. The message spread throughout Westeros. Walls were no longer enough. Castles were no longer safe. Aegon's next major opponent, Argilac Durrandon. Argilac was the Storm King. He was a proud warrior.
Before the invasion, Aegon attempted to negotiate.
Tell your master I will not yield! I will have his hands instead.
Argilac's response was insulting.
He sent Orys Baratheon against the Stormlands. Orys was one of Aegon's closest supporters. The battle ended with Argilac's defeat. The ancient Durrandon royal line came to an end.
He transformed them. Orys Baratheon married Argilac's daughter, Argella. He took the Durrandon sigil and adopted the Durrandon words.
And from this union came House Baratheon. A new dynasty was born from the ashes of an old one. This would become one of the defining patterns of Aegon's conquest. But Aegon had not yet faced the greatest army assembled against him. In the west, King Mern of the Reach joined forces with King Loren Lannister. Together, for perhaps the first time, Aegon's army faced an enemy. The armies met on a field as the Field of Fire, when dragonfire consumed them all. The battle began like any conventional medieval battle. Infantry advanced, cavalry charged, archers fired, thousands of soldiers fought. But then the dragons arrived. Aegon rode Balerion, Visenya rode Vhagar, Rhaenys rode Meraxes. They attacked an army with no defense. King Loren Lannister survived. He understood that continuing the war could mean the destruction of his own dynasty. So Loren Lannister bent the knee. Aegon's armies continued moving north. Eventually, the forces of House Stark approached. King Torrhen Stark had gathered a huge army. He could have fought. He had thousands of soldiers. He was the king in the north. Torrhen understood the war he was entering. If he fought Aegon, his army might be destroyed. And if his army was destroyed, the north could suffer for generations. Torrhen looked at the situation. Aegon had dragons. He had conquered Harrenhal. He had defeated the Storm King. He had destroyed the Gardeners. And now the north was standing between Aegon and his goal. He would not fight. He would surrender. The king in the north became the Lord of Winterfell. The title of king in the north disappeared. If he had fought, thousands of northern soldiers could have died. Instead, his kingdom survived. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when not to fight. The Vale presented another challenge. The Eyrie was one of the most defensible castles in Westeros.
Queen Regent Shara Arryn was unwilling to simply surrender. But Visenya Targaryen approached the problem differently. Rather than sending an enormous army into the mountains, she flew directly to the Eyrie on Vhagar. She landed within the castle.
May I ride the great beast?
You shall, my little king.
The Vale submitted to Aegon. Once again, the dragon had accomplished something an army might have struggled to achieve. The conquest was not always about destruction. Sometimes it was about fear.
By now, Aegon had conquered almost all of Westeros. But one kingdom remained: Dorne. Unlike the other rulers, the Dornish did not attempt to defeat Aegon through a massive conventional battle. Instead, they used a completely different strategy. They refused to give him the battle Aegon wanted. Dornish forces disappeared into the mountains. They abandoned settlements, they attacked supply lines, they used the desert. They used their knowledge of the land. Aegon's dragons could burn castles, but they could not burn an enemy they could not find. The Targaryens eventually occupied parts of Dorne. Aegon had conquered 6 kingdoms. Dorne remained outside his control. This would become one of the great unfinished chapters of his reign. After conquering much of Westeros, Aegon created something the continent had never seen before: a single throne. The Iron Throne was made from the swords of Aegon's defeated enemies. According to tradition, the swords were melted down and forged into a massive throne. It was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable, and it represented the brutal reality of Aegon's rule. The throne was not beautiful. It was not designed for comfort. It was a reminder. Every sword represented someone who had once believed they could defeat Aegon. Now those swords formed the seat from which he ruled. The Iron Throne became the physical symbol of the new kingdom, and from that moment forward, the ruler of Westeros would sit upon it. Aegon's original settlement had been called the Aegon Fort, but it did not remain a simple military camp. It grew. People arrived, merchants came, soldiers came, builders came. The settlement expanded. Eventually, it became King's Landing. The city would become the capital of the 7 kingdoms, and Aegon's choice of location. For centuries, King's Landing would remain the political center of Westeros. Every great royal wedding, every rebellion.
But when Aegon first arrived there was no great city. There was only a landing, a small settlement, and a dragon lord with an ambition.
Conquering Westeros was one challenge. Ruling it was another. Aegon now had to transform 7 rival kingdoms into one political structure. Aegon did not simply destroy the existing nobility. In many cases, he allowed defeated rulers and their descendants to retain influence. The Targaryens ruled above them, but the old kings were no longer independent. They became lords. Aegon also created a new system of royal administration. The hand of the king became one of the most important positions in the realm. The king could not personally govern every region. He needed representatives, he needed advisors, and gradually, the political structure of the 7 kingdoms began to develop. The Conquest had created the kingdom. Now Aegon had to make it function. One of Aegon's most important political challenges was the faith of the 7. The faith was deeply established in Westeros. Targaryens had a major cultural difference from much of the population. They practiced traditions that included sibling marriage. For the faith, this was deeply controversial.
Aegon therefore had to balance his family's customs with the beliefs of the people he now ruled. Rather than attempting to destroy the faith, ward coexistence. This was crucial.
A conqueror can force people to obey, but a successful ruler must convince them to accept the new order. Aegon's ability to maintain the support of important religious instruments helped stabilize his rule. The Targaryens attempted to force the Dorne continued resisting. The conflict became increasingly bitter.
Eventually, Aegon realized that Dorne could not simply be conquered in the same way as the other kingdoms. The war continued for years.
For Aegon, this was different from losing a battle. This was personal. Rhaenys had been his sister, his wife, his queen. Her death changed Aegon's relationship with Dorne. The conflict was no longer simply about territory. It had become revenge. The consequences would echo throughout his reign. Aegon's family would eventually become one of the greatest sources of instability within the Targaryen dynasty. Aegon had 2 sons. As Aegon grew older, he became less like the young conqueror. His reign had lasted decades, the kingdom had become more stable, and King's Landing had grown. In 37 AC, Aegon died. He was 63 years old. The conqueror was gone, but his kingdom remained. Many conquerors create empires that collapse immediately after their death. Aegon created something that survived him. The royal administration remained. Aegon had transformed Westeros from 7 competing kingdoms into a single realm. But his death did not mean the end of conflict. Aegon would be followed by generations of Targaryen kings. Some would be wise, some would be brilliant, but every one of them inherited the world Aegon had created. Rhaenys inherited the throne. Maegor eventually seized it. Jaehaerys would later bring stability to the realm. Viserys would eventually inherit the same throne. To some people, Aegon was the man who ended centuries of pointless wars. He created one kingdom from 7. He established peace between rival kingdoms. But to others, Aegon was simply a foreign invader. He arrived with dragons. He destroyed armies. He took kingdoms that had never asked to become part of his empire. Perhaps the greatest irony of Aegon's story is what happened to the throne he created. The Iron Throne was designed to represent unity, but generations of Targaryens would fight over it. Aegon had created a united Westeros. But he had also created the ultimate prize. A prize powerful enough to make men and women destroy everything around them. And that is why Aegon the Conqueror remains one of the most important figures in the history of Westeros. Not simply because he rode the greatest dragon Westeros had ever seen.
His conquest lasted only a few years, but its consequences lasted for centuries. And perhaps that is the true meaning of the name, Aegon the Conqueror.
He created the Westeros that everyone else would spend centuries fighting over. 1 dragon lord, 3 dragons, 7 kingdoms, 1 throne.